Hello and welcome, Elle here, and today I'll be drawing the first of 7 4x4-inch coasters for Gallery Nucleus Portland's 11th annual Salut Coaster Show. Let's rock and roll. First, I drew a 4x4-inch border on a loose sheet of computer paper to act as my register, and then I lay a sheet of transparent tracing paper over top. This is how I like to conceptualize my drawings. It gives me a lot more freedom as I play around with composition and sizing, and if you too are cost conscious like I am, this also removes a lot of the stress that comes with experimenting on new or precious material. Tracing paper is like so cheap, and honestly, it's a superpower. Since this is number 1 in a 7-piece series, I figure I'll be gentle on myself and keep it relatively simple. I don't have an end goal for this illustration, and I'm opting to work improvisationally as I tend to have a lot more fun watching what the hands and brain come up with when left to their own devices. This also allows me to focus my manpower on familiarizing myself with the material of the coasters. In terms of the concept, I know I want to depict the head as a container of sorts. Right now I have a crudely drawn house of cards as a placeholder, and this is just a motif I have in my notes. It's something I've wanted to employ for a while, but I haven't quite found that perfect composition yet. Yeah, I don't think this is the piece for it, but like I said, it worked as a placeholder while I focused on the elements I'm more sure of, such as her face and her hair. Even though I know I want her head bisected, I like to err on the side of drawing more than I need. That is, drawing the complete form before distorting or cropping it to my vision. I find this useful when maintaining anatomical or structural truths. Just because the top of her head may or may not be visible by the final iteration doesn't mean I shouldn't include it as a way of double-checking my proportions. Now, as you'll see at this point, I got the bright idea to test out baby bangs on her. You know, some people can pull it off, but, I think part of the magic of working on tracing paper is this ability to throw something down and erase it just as easily. Having a kill your darlings attitude is essential, but it only takes me so far when drawing in a traditional sketch pad where even erased pencil marks will often leave ghost traces behind. But using this layered transparent paper technique, I already know I'll be redrawing this image 3 or 4 times before transferring it to the coaster, and the paper's almost waxy coating really allows me to erase with wanton abandon, so the killing of the darlings has never been easier, and I think that's so important, especially in the conception phase of any drawing. At this point, I'm trying to fine-tune this character's facial features. By drawing the features in which I'm most confident first, I'm able to slide the paper back and forth over my initial sketch and visualize where to place the nostril and the nose highlight. These are the smallest features in the face, but in my experience, their placement is the most consequential. There's a strange irony in that, huh? Once her face and placement have been hammered down, it'll be time to decide what to put in her head. This is the fun part for me, and while I'm fine-tuning her lines, I'm also brainstorming what types of objects or motifs fit the feeling I'm going for. I'd initially started with a house of cards, and while I still don't think that's the way to go, I would like to do something along the lines of toys or knickknacks. After going through a mental Rolodex, I decided to take inspiration from the Russian nesting doll. I'm a huge sucker for repetition, and something about the interior layers, the almost exoskeletal nature of it intrigues me, and I don't know, maybe there's some symbolic potential in that. So, here we go. I'm gonna take a minute here to talk about a question that I get every once in a while, and I feel like every time I get the chance to actually respond, my mind goes blank and I forget words and my head becomes a runaway balloon. So I figured this is a better format for it. Every once in a while, someone will ask how I come up with ideas for drawings. In other words, where does the inspiration come from? I think one of the bigger misconceptions around art, or rather creative expression as a whole, is this idea that human beings are born with a predetermined and finite amount of imagination. I know at least the way the adults talked when I was a kid, I grew up convinced that the older you get, the less creative you become, and it always terrified me. But I now know that doesn't have to be the case, and there are so many factors that contribute to our sense of imagination beyond this binary view of age. I like to treat creativity more like a muscle rather than a God-given talent, for lack of a better term, or a limited and youth-centric resource. And I say muscle because sometimes it requires a little conditioning, sometimes a little stretching. Sometimes I think a lot of what imagination is about is breaking the rules, right? So if we allow ourselves to break conceptual rules a little bit every day, breaking rules in a maybe bigger or more dramatic way becomes a lot more accessible to us. Something I always recommend, as I wish I'd started sooner, is journaling and a little something I call motif collecting. Basically, in a notebook I carry everywhere at all times, I have a section devoted to all of the objects, settings, and potential motifs that entice me, either structurally or maybe symbolically. To give a few examples, I have, of course, the House of Cards mentioned earlier. Some other objects do include fly swatter, claw machine, boxing glove, wisteria, timeout, question mark, crabs. I could go on, but I'm not going to put you through that. All this is to say, having pages of what are essentially conceptual springboards is so helpful, at least for me, in directing a lot of those unchanneled emotions. I think this can also be useful just for maintaining or even discovering an art style. The more things you write down, the more you kind of start to find your own voice incidentally. Is there a theme to the kind of objects that you're drawn to? Is there a theme to the structure? Is there a shared pattern or maybe an overlapping function? Do they tend to be from a similar era? Are there any motifs or objects that you know you wouldn't want to incorporate into your style? Sometimes to know what we are, we have to know what we aren't. So yeah, when it comes to concept creation, I definitely advise the whole journaling thing, the motif collecting, and reading and writing, taking walks, and getting out of the house a little bit. I know that for a lot of people, we live very busy lives and might not have time for all of these extra exercises. And for them, I would like to recommend my favorite exercise of all, and it's something that I actually have incorporated into my nighttime routine. So, you know that phase of falling asleep where you're like 25% awake, 75% asleep, and your mind has like entered dreamy land, just enough for the conscious quarter of you to sit there and think. Yeah, this is trippy as balls. Well, that's how I get my ideas. Quasi-dreams generated by my human brain, informed by lived experiences, and a collection of motifs all being compressed and shuffled together in a state of, like, almost sleep. It probably isn't that complicated, and I'm sure there's a single word or a phrase that means all of that in a less pretentious way. I don't know, leave a comment if you know. But needless to say, writing this video script was really a glaring reminder of why I'm so bad at answering this question concisely in person. But it is done. It is here now, in the archives, solved. Now be an artist and take a nap. After transferring my final composition, I went and re-established the lines with red lead and an 05 mechanical pencil. I went in with the classic red for the lines because I knew I wanted to use a warm pink Copic for the fills later. I kind of wanted each coaster to have its own color profile, and to begin, I'm most comfortable with pink and the pink palette, so I figured I'd start there. When inking, I always prefer for my first pass to be done with as small a nib as possible, usually 005s if I can get away with it. This is because I kind of treat the first pass as more of a locking in of the composition instead of focusing on line weight or achieving a perfect line in the first stroke. By my second or third pass, I'm usually introducing 0.01 nibs, maybe all the way up to 0.05. Since these coasters are only 4x4, I think it's a little risky to work all the way up to 0.05. I think it could maybe make some of the lines a bit too varied for what I'm going for here. My goal is to have the imagery be fairly obvious even from a few feet away, and when working this small, I think it can be a little confusing to introduce too many line sizes. Texture overload is something I feel like I'm kind of visually sensitive to, so I definitely try to keep an eye on it. And when a piece is this small, you can assume that your audience will be experiencing the whole of it all at once. When that's the case, I always like to opt for the less is more approach. Allowing there to be some breathing space on the page is a great way of reassuring your audience, or even yourself for that matter, that no, 4x4 inches of canvas isn't claustrophobic or restrictive. In fact, it's open, inviting, full of potential and open to versatile interpretation. Did I go cross-eyed drawing this tiny little person coming out of the head? Yes. Yes, I did. But they don't have to know that, and they certainly don't have to feel it. In managing our texture economy, we do have something of a say in this. With that first pass of ink down, I'm now going back to my mechanical pencil with the red lead, and I'm just gonna start really gradually feathering in some color. I'm trying to keep it really soft, and I'm trying to exercise patience here. The lead is making such little contact with the page that half the time it looks like nothing's happening, but it is. It's just a very gradual process. I think establishing where my shadows are before I go back in to readdress the line weight is probably the best move. I like to thicken my lines in accordance to where the shadows might fall, so having these pencil marks down is a good guide for that step once we get to it. But before then, we are going to break out the Copic markers and really carve out these shadows. Moving into the background, I know I want a pink solid fill, and I went with my Artfinity alcohol markers this time rather than the Copics. This shade called Frozen Strawberries, like the exact color I'm going for, but I'm gonna go ahead and say this was a little teensy-weensy bit of a mistake. While I love Artfinity for their colors, and I think they work serviceably on small fills, when it comes to the way the ink naturally blends into itself for larger fills, these markers have more of a tendency to leave, like, marker stripes, marker marks, artifacts? Is that the right word? They tend to leave like these marker stripes, and when I use alcohol markers, I almost always like to go for that textureless, solid overlay look, something that you can almost see more frequently digitally. But when these like nib artifacts show, it kind of cramps my style just a bit, not gonna lie. I am focusing this year on allowing more human flaws into the work, not getting so hung up on the perfection side of things, and allowing there to be some evidence of a person behind all the work. While that's important, I would totally be lying if I said that part of my brain wasn't itching and wishing that I could redo it. But here we are, and by the end of it, I still like the piece. It's just, yeah. Fun fact, this piece is called Get Me Out of This Conversation. I'm finishing up the line weight, and I'm also considering what color to make the border or frame of the drawing. I kind of imagine treating these coasters like Pokemon cards. I'm an avid, borderline problematic collector, and right now my favorite cards to collect are the full art cards, the ones where the illustrations extend all the way to the card's edge. My current baby is the Surging Sparks Full Face Melodic EX. Shout out to my fellow few and far between melodic appreciators. But bearing this in mind, the full art cards are only so special because there exist cards with borders. So, this will be my card with border. I tested out a pink Posca initially, but quickly realized that was not the move, rather opting for the red Posca that I had initially planned to use. Much like with the previous line art, I'm going in with as fine a line as I can and a straight edge to establish the shape and curvature of the border. Then I'll be going in for a second pass where I'll be thickening the line weight free-handedly. This is normally a pretty stressful step because I generally work on smooth Bristol, which essentially has no tooth whatsoever. So when I use Poscas or any other kinds of acrylic medium, I feel that the lack of tooth and absorbency can sometimes allow the ink to slip and slide before it permeates the page and actually settles in its place. Now, I don't tend to work with very opaque materials, and I do like to showcase the texture of the raw paper that I'm working on. Because of this, I can't always rely on whiteout or paint to bail me out of situations involving misplaced ink. Luckily, these coasters have such a great fluffy tooth to them that I really don't have to worry too much about the ink rolling off and losing its way. Hey, remember way back before when we had that whole conversation about how this year I'm going to be less of a perfectionist and allow human flaws to find their way into my art and blah, 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 blah. Remember that? No, you don't, because it didn't happen. Because if it did, I am a liar, because I am absolutely going back and I am readdressing this background. While taking further alcohol ink to it probably isn't a good solution, I decided I'm just going to create a gradient with my red colored lead and let the rest be. This is also the time to make any last minute adjustments to her face or lines before I go in with the spray fixative and move on to our 4x4 inch review. Well, thanks so much for following along, you guys. Feel free to subscribe or check out my website or newsletter if you want to stick around and see how the other 6 coasters turn out, or if you just want to see what other kind of videos end up going up in the future. Other than that, take care of yourselves and have a good one. L out.